G'day everyone. How are we all? Are we all coming back in from the exhibition area now? Awesome. I might get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Aaron Meldrum. I'm one of the founders of Man Up Tasmania. Before we get into this evening, I'd like to personally pay my respects to the local Aboriginal community, those who are seen and unseen in our community. I just want to say that we see you. We'd also like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. As an Aboriginal man from regional New South Wales, I would like to thank them for their continual custodianship of the beautiful lands which I can call home. We hope that through our connection to country and its people, we can begin to heal the wounds of the past and create a thriving community for our future. At this time, I'd like to ask a local Aboriginal woman, Helen Gower, to the stage to open tonight's event with a welcome to country.
Ya Palingana Luchuita. Hello and welcome to Tasmania. I stand here today as a proud Palawa woman and extend my welcome to you all. As I welcome you to this country, I would like to acknowledge the Panalapana people. The Panalapana people are the traditional owners of this land. We were central to Pantana, Port Sorell, and drifted across the northwest. They lived, hunted, and journeyed across various river systems to travel around the northwest coast. They cared for the country, the land, the animals, the waterways, and the people for thousands of years, and for this I thank them. I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders past and present, the people who have cared for our country in the past, and for the ones who are continuing to heal our country and people today. And continue sharing knowledge about the truth and the hard past and our incredible resilience and our greatest achievements. I believe our future elders will keep our culture alive as one of the oldest living cultures in the world. And for this, I thank them and I thank the caregivers for the support and for raising the next generation of deadly First Nations people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thanks, Jeff, for the recommendation. Really great. Welcome to country. Really well received. Thanks very much. So I hope that this event, or our hope for this event, is to inform and to teach people some effective ways to manage their own mental health and their life beyond trauma. And with that in mind, we believe it's important to acknowledge the lived experience in the room. We understand that every person in our community will have some experiences of ill mental health, and we acknowledge that those experiences are and can be extremely challenging for those who have experienced them. With that in mind, we would like to ask the audience to be mindful of the ways in which we engage that we do. Man Up Tasmania's vision is to improve the community's ability to better look after each other. We hope to achieve this through various strategies, education, and most common to date is the delivery of mental health first aid, which at this point we have found some amazing community partners who have enabled us to deliver this for free to over 150 people. This is only a very brief explanation of what we currently do. You may have noticed the big, huge trailer out in the expo hall. It's another one of our projects. But for us here at Man Up Tas, we like to be sort of in the background. And for us here tonight, it's about you guys, the community, to ask these questions of our amazing guest speakers and our panel presentators that we have later on this evening. As far as audience engagement, so we're going to do our panel experience a little bit different this evening. So we have created or found a tool online called Slido. As this event is all about you, we have created this opportunity for everyone to engage with our guest speakers, those here in the room and those who are viewing online. As such, we put together a few online polls which are open now. So if you would like to scan either the QR codes or on slido.com, if you enter the code mental health or MHF 2023, sorry, I had to look at Michael, he's nodding at me, that will get you into the Slido browser, so you can ask any questions throughout the evening. All answers on Slido or all questions, on Slido will be completely anonymous, so you don't need to put your name against them. And we do ask that, as there is only a small amount of time for our panel session this evening, we won't be taking many or any questions throughout the panel presentation. This is for two reasons. One, it is a time sort of restriction for us. We want to make sure we have an opportunity for our speakers to answer as many questions as possible. But two, it helps us to moderate the questions that are being asked by the audience as well. We will endeavour to answer all questions that do go up on Slido within the coming weeks, but we'll focus on the most relevant ones for this evening throughout tonight's panel presentation. All right, so we're not here, as I mentioned, to talk about us and to talk about Man Up Tasmania. We're here tonight for you guys, the community. So with that, I would like to invite our first guest speaker to the stage. So Alex is an extraordinary individual who embodies resilience, reinvention, and a positive outlook on life. Alex experienced a life-changing injury while playing rugby in 2018, which left him permanently quadriplegic. Despite the challenges, he has demonstrated remarkable achievements. Alex has defied the odds. He's regained significant strength and movement in his arms and legs, even developing the ability to partly stand up. His journey has showcased incredible self-esteem, self-worth, and self-love. Alex's inspiring story and his pursuit of an adventurous life and extreme athlete have captured the nation's attention. Through his experiences, he encourages individuals to challenge the limitations they perceive and realise that the only restrictions in life are the ones that we create in our minds. Can I give a round of applause to Alex, please? Thank you so much, Alex. Awesome speech, mate. Well done. And congratulations to you for everything you've achieved and undoubtedly will continue to achieve in your life. So again, just a round of applause for Alex, please.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have a brief 20-minute intermission now where it's on you guys now to go have a bit of a mingle and a chat. Alex has said that he's happy to have a bit of a yarn with some people. Please don't all just jump on him all at once. We have 20 minutes to have a bit of a chat. But if you would like to head out into the expo area and have a bit of a chat to the guys that are out there, that would be great. And if we could come back in here at 7:10, we will start with our next speaker. Thank you, everyone. All right, everyone. I'm glad you've all come back into the room now, and I hope you've all had a bite to eat. I just wanted to make just slight mention to the guys on the live stream and the people here in the room as well, just to let you guys know that we are live streaming this event to YouTube and various other different platforms. But just for your own knowledge, audience members aren't in any of the footage going live, so it is just the people on stage. Just thought I should mention that just for your own safety. So our next speaker is standing on stage here with me. So Melinda Stephens is a clinical psychologist from Ulverston who will present the community resilience model, a way to understand the impact of our stressful experiences, and importantly, practical ways to shift us towards well-being suitable for all ages. So hand over to Miranda.
Thank you. Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Man Up, for the invitation tonight, and to the Devonport City Council and Primary Health Tasmania for making this happen. Thanks, Helen, for the beautiful welcome, and I'd also like to acknowledge that that we're gathering on First Nations land that was never ceded, and near this beautiful Paranaple, or mouth of the Mersey River. And man, Alex was a bit of a hard act to follow. Just amazing, very, very inspiring. So I'm a clinical psychologist, as Aaron mentioned, and what I wanted to do today was introduce you to a model which I know there's plenty of people in the room who are health professionals or just people really interested in your own nervous system and how to look after your own health and mental health, because we do actually have to take action towards our mental health and health every day, really. And so what I'll give you an overview of and introduce you to a couple of strategies with is what's called the community resiliency model. So window of tolerance, polyvagal theory are all informed, or this model is informed by those, for those who know that. And this is a model that I use pretty much every day, really, in my work with different groups. So I actually just do group work all over Tasmania, in person and online in regional and remote areas as well. And my passion is really about helping people to understand themselves and how we as humans operate. And I only know this stuff just because I've spent, just quietly 30 years, just about, learning about this and practicing every psychological technique I learn on myself, and am really passionate about how this model really helps us to understand ourselves and each other, and it has a real focus on well-being, which I think isn't always and hasn't always been the focus of psychologists and the medical professions. So to give you a bit of an overview of this model, we all have what we might call our OK zone. It's called the resilient zone because it's when we're able to adapt and be flexible and meet challenges and, change how we think about things, alter our actions and behaviours, meet all the challenges that we come across in the day. When we're in this zone, we can feel quite calm, quite present, but we also experience other emotions like hurt and disappointment and frustration. But, it's that sort of mode we're in when we've got this. We can face all that difficulty, and we've still got our head together, and we can sort of rise to the challenges. We're, our best selves here. We can problem solve, we can make decisions, we can be creative, we can find things funny, and importantly, we can connect with people. So it's when we feel like taking up that social invite, where we feel like we can actually ask for help. As Alex said, is such an important skill because we are social creatures and we do need other people in our lives, hey? So within this okay or resiliency zone, we sort of move within it. So you don't just sort of get stuck there, but there's little things every day that give us a little shift, to stay within that zone or, drop us a little bit depending on how tasty your bit of supper was out there perhaps, or, if perhaps you saw somebody like I did that I haven't seen for a while and you get that sort of little boost. So we sort of move within these zones moment to moment all of the time. And we can experience, as I said before, all of these different emotions, and they go along with body sensations and actions and what's going on in our mind as well. So hopefully you can all relate to what it might feel like to be in the okay zone. For some of us, we might not hit that very often, so we might not, feel like we're in that okay zone a lot of the time. And also we can have quite a narrow okay zone sometimes. So we might, have times in our life where there's a lot going on and it doesn't take us much to get bumped out of that or to react in ways that we might usually not react quite so, strongly to. So that okay zone is narrow for each person, and it's also at times in our life can change. But the good news is that we can actually work to widen it, and there are some, practical things that we can do, and in fact you likely all do already to make that happen. So when we're in this zone, if you're interested in your biology, that sort of main nerve that makes most of our body function, our heart beat and our breathing rate and tension in our muscles, our digestion work, pretty much everything in our body is affected and controlled by the vagus nerve. So we've got ventral vagus nerve activation when we're in this okay zone, but we can get bumped out of it sometimes. So you can see here some of the things that might happen when you're in the okay zone. And then if you get bumped up into what we might call the high zone, where everything is a little bit faster, that's when we're in sympathetic nervous system activation, or what you might know as fight or flight. So some of the primary emotions here might be anger or anxiety. They're really quite twin emotions that we might feel here. We can just really notice uncomfortable body sensations, that real muscle tension. We've moved into protective mode here. And we have this sort of lens, like when we're biologically in this zone, it actually really changes how we think about things and how we perceive things around us as well. It's really determined by our biology there. There's such a strong interaction between our mind and our body. And there's been studies where people are shown the same facial expression, so a same photo of a face, but depending on what zone you're in, you'll interpret the emotion on that person's face differently. So you might think that they look calm when you're okay, in the calm okay zone, but if you're feeling angry, then you actually interpret their face as angry as well. So we're really quite driven. Our thoughts in these zones are very much, well, could be, we're all different, but there could be about blaming other people or finding fault, or we can get really stuck in problem solving and just trying to stop that stress, and we can get really stuck in things. This is where worry and thinking about the future can really have a bit of a part to play here. And this is a really normal place to be in, hey? It is. You can probably all relate to that. Can you all relate to feeling in that sort of high zone? Because it's normal. There are numerous threats every day that our body perceives as a threat that you might not consciously think is, but even getting a text message that you don't know, quite what it means, or the list of things that you're not sure you're going to get through, a new bill arriving in the post, or there's so many ways that we might, and again, we're all different, but we might register as a threat and then move into this bit of defensiveness. And then, of course, it can build and build. So it's really normal. There's a lot of people that unfortunately sort of get stuck in anxiety because they worry that what they're feeling here isn't actually normal. But it is normal states, and it's their messages really, that it sort of means that there's something going on that we need to respond to, and or maybe not if we're overfiring, but we need to listen to it and sort of see. It's a problem when we get stuck and when we're like right high up the top, when we've got really significant reactions and we might feel overwhelmed by the stress and we sort of get stuck up there. So ideally we're made to move between zones, but yeah, getting stuck up there is a problem, and it can look like anxiety or trauma. So then we have a third, probably makes sense really, doesn't it? We've got the high zone, we've got the low zone as well. And so this is where often it happens when we've been stuck in that high zone for so long and we have a bit of a crash because our nervous system just can't stay in that high pace for so long. So we might crash, or we might just hit that sort of low zone. So we've got dorsal vagal activation here. And again, a really normal sort of phase to be in, and we can sort of move through that, and normal to be sort of bumped into that low zone where we might feel quite exhausted and depleted or just tired at the beginning, and where we might just need to have a bit of time on our own and try to sort of regroup. The sort of further down we get, we might start to feel quite flat in our mood. We might start to lose our motivation and enjoyment in things. We struggle to think clearly in this zone as well. And this time it's because it's almost like, you might not be able to think clearly. It's like sludge in your mind. You can't sort of make decisions that way. Can people relate to this sort of a zone as well? Yeah. And this is where we shut ourselves away. And sometimes it can be just, I've just got too much going on and I just need to, shut myself away. But it can become unhelpful, And this is where we actually really lose that capacity when we're right in that low zone to reach out to other people, to connect. So we're quite disconnected when we're in that high up, in this high zone, and we're in the low zone, and it's actually really hard to sort of reach out and do that. So there's many. We're all different in how we present in all of these, but that's an example of what might happen in each of those zones. So just to go over that again, so we've got this resilient zone that we move. Oh, there it is. That we move between. We can get bumped out, and there can be sort of stressful or traumatic events that might bump us up out of this zone, and there might be external or there might be internal things that bump us up. You can see by that sort of green line here that sometimes we might not even hit that okay zone. We might just feel like we're rocketing all over the place. We might find that we experience, when we're right up there, sort of that edgy, irritable sort of anxiety, panic sort of stuff. We're much more likely to experience any discomfort in our body much more strongly here. And it's normal, but not great to be stuck in the high zone, and we can do something about that. And then here's the bottom, what it looks like depression when we're sort of way down here. And what's really important is that this is our nervous system, and there are some things that we can do to, help ourselves to get through this. So one of the things that we can do to work out exactly where we are in the sort of in all the zones, and also which is regulating itself, is actually just to track the sensations that are going on. Does anybody here feel like they live in their head a bit? Like you're always thinking, and yeah, there's a few nods. So we can be really, our mind is an amazing problem-solving machine, but it wants to just always do problem-solving for everything. And sometimes problem-solving doesn't always work for emotional stuff or stuff that we can't sort of change. And what we can do when we sort of get really stuck in trying to work things out in our head, or if we've had uncomfortable experiences in our body, is we almost like sort of cut ourselves off and don't want to actually even sort of feel what's on in our body. And then it sort of creates a bit of an avoidance loop, and it makes us even, really quite scared of emotions and not wanting to feel things. So a sort of a more digestible or way that we can start to, increase our awareness of what zone we're in so that we can, look after ourselves, but also just to regulate itself is to track sensations that are going on. So sensations are things like, if you want to do this, like this is invitational, you can just sort of sit there, but if you want to, you can just turn your attention to your face so that we can get a bit of a sense of what sensations actually feel like. So just check in and see if your forehead is a little bit scrunched, or even scrunch it up a bit yourself if you want, and just feel that tension there. So our emotions resonate through our face, hey? And there's sensations going on all the time that are expressions of how we feel and what's going on in our nervous system. And we can then give some feedback back to it by how we arrange our face as well. But feel that tension, and then maybe find somewhere else in your face or with your forehead even, if you just let that go a bit smooth and a bit slack, or feel tightness in your jaw. Does anyone here clench their jaw? Lots. It's a pretty common place to hold our tension. So you might notice if you've got tension there now, or if you just relax it and just feel it. So rather than thinking about what's going on, we're actually feeling it in our bodies. You might also just be able to feel, if you pay close attention, the air on your skin. And you might notice the temperature of your face. So that's a sensation to notice as well. And then you might notice where you're breathing in and out of, whether it's your nose or your mouth. And you might notice the movement of the breath. Right at the very tip of where the air enters your body. And just feel that movement passing over your nostrils or your lips. And then as you breathe out, feeling that. And you might notice a change in the temperature of the air, hey? So we can do things to create sensations, but also sensations will just, if we just pay attention to them, just change of their own accord as well. So now, if you'd like to, just check in with the rest of your body and just notice how you feel. And I'll see if I can go backwards here. Do you know which zone you're in? So just noting to yourself, reading your body and listening to whether you might be in the okay zone, whether you might be in the high or in the low zone. And also whether you might be in the middle of that zone, or whether you might be sort of up towards one of the lines or not. And how you know that is because you're listening to your body and reading it. And also when you do that, that actually starts to shift you into well-being. And you started connecting sort of the mind and the body again instead of the disconnection. So tracking is one of the skills that can shift us into well-being. It's an internal resourcing sort of skill, one of the things that we can do, and it doesn't matter how far in that low zone you are or how high up in that high zone, we can do that. There's going to be some sensations that we can find to track. And then what we can also do is shift into finding a sensation that feels pleasant or neutral, because we've got this negativity bias of our mind. So we're going to usually go to the unpleasant stuff in our body. So if you've got pain or discomfort from aging, or things that are just not working as well as they used to, or just uncomfortable from sitting for a while, the mind goes to that uncomfortable place. But we can actually train it to notice more of the pleasant stuff, because that's also there. Just like you might have felt some neutral or pleasant sensations in your face. So just invite you, if you want to notice if there's any place in your body right now which feels pleasant, or if not pleasant, even just neutral. Might be warm or soft or light. And the neuroscience says if you can just keep your attention there for 20 to 30 seconds and let yourself soak that up, the more you do that, the more you're actually able to really notice that good stuff. And that's how we notice when we're happy, when we're calm, when we actually can experience those sensations, because emotions are sensations. So shift into that place again in your body if you like. And soak it up. And if you can't feel much, that's okay. And if, like, psychologists like to get people to do pretty weird stuff like this, but there's plenty of research around to show that it can be really useful, but you might need to practice it a little bit. And I'll tell you how you can do that later if you're interested. So these are some of the sensation words that sometimes we have to learn because we're too busy in that sort of thinking mode, and we have to learn actually, how does my body feel? And all the different ranges of emotions that we feel are really normal, and we're meant to feel even the unpleasant stuff. But when we block ourselves from feeling unpleasant stuff, we're not that clever to be able to just let the good stuff in. We end up blocking out all emotions. So we block out the good as well as the bad. And that's also what can keep us stuck in the low zone. So being able to sort of tolerate some of the difficult emotions, but also being open to some of the good emotions through our body sensations. And when we learn to discern the differences between sensations of distress and well-being, we begin to have a choice in what we can pay attention to. And we can start to open up more and more to what is good, what feels okay in our body, what feels okay emotionally, what feels okay in our life. And so to finish with one more little exercise, so we can do internal things to shore us up and shift into well-being. And we can also take advantage of external resources as well. And Alex referred to these when he talked about the people in his life that were really important and who he reached out and connected with. And so when we talk about a resource in our life, we're talking about all of those things that are actually available to us to help us to feel good in some way, to experience fun, creativity, adventure, contentment, satisfaction, and importantly, connectedness that we all need. And so we've got people and pets and places and activities and objects as well. And the wonderful thing is that we don't even need to be actively engaged in something. You know, if life is just full on, or you are a bit stuck in that low zone and can't find the motivation to do stuff, we can actually even just recall or remember something. So if you want to, you could just try this out and just think about one resource that you have had at any time in your life. Like, it could even be somewhere you went on holiday as a kid, or a pet that you had as a kid that you don't have any longer. So just anything in your life that has given you that sense of, good feeling at some point. Just think of one thing and try to remember it in as much detail as possible. And think about what it is that you appreciated about that resource. You don't have to visualise, just get a sense of remembering it as best you can. and you might get a sense also of how it makes you feel now. So our thoughts are really powerful, so we can use them into our advantage, and we can recall things that make us feel good. So in the middle of the night when you can't sleep, or when you're feeling really down and you can't get off your couch, or whatever it might be, you can even just, think about something, and that might be just enough to help you shift towards that okay zone. So just a couple of notes on the importance of connecting and looking after ourselves. We have to, we can be. The beautiful news about this, and what I love about my job as a psychologist, is we can take some action towards our well-being. But we have to work on ourselves first, and I think there's many people here in the room who care for other people, either in your family or through your work or whatever, and we have to look after our self first, and through that we also end up looking after people around us as well, because especially the people that feel connected to us, they pick up on how we feel. Hey, we pick up on theirs, yeah? We read each other. We have mirror cells that do it even. And if we regulate, we're not only looking after ourselves, but we're looking after other people as well. And it's just to this, level of unconsciously picking up breathing rate and muscle tone and posture and all of that sort of stuff. So really learning to read your own body is a really powerful thing. And we have an opportunity to regulate others and to see people's nervous system, and to, when we come across someone in that low zone or that high zone, to not necessarily take it personally, even if it feels personal, but to actually read their nervous system as, they've been bumped and they're in self-protection mode, and they're just doing their best, just as we are when we're in those zones. And we can increase our regulation. So I'm running out of time. I always, get a bit too excited. We can develop a bit of a wellbeing map. This is something we do in some of the courses that we run, where we identify, this is mine, some of the things that we can do when we're in each of those zones to be able to shift back towards the okay zone, to stay in there, or to be able to tolerate stuff if we just are in that okay zone. And if you would like to find out a bit more about this, there's a free app, and it's called iChill. And there's a little bit of a handout, I think, out there somewhere, isn't there, Aaron, which has a picture of that, so you can look it up in your own app store. Totally free, and it explains those 3 zones again, and it goes through and it gives you some guidance around the resourcing and tracking activities that we've done, and it also adds on some other skills that are really evidence-based for helping us to shift into well-being, whatever sort of state you're in, and children and adolescents are suitable for it as well. And also on that page, we've got a bit of information about some of the really key resources where you can access some other help and support, because if you are wanting a little bit extra or know somebody who does, it's really hard to get into people one-on-one at the moment. I'm sort of really aware of that, but there's lots of other things that you might be able to do as well. So there's some other resources there, and lots of free tracks on my self-plug here, shameless self-plug, free tracks on my own website. So we've got some tracks to help people get to sleep and to increase the capacity to sort of tolerate body sensations and open up to happiness and the good stuff in life as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Miranda. And if anyone was going to live up to the proverb that I mentioned at the beginning, particularly with relation to teaching a man how to fish, I think you've really done well there, giving people some real actionable skills and resources that they can take home with them and use outside of here. So I'd now like to take this opportunity just to remind everyone that we do have Slido going at the moment, which is our online polling tool. So we do have quite a few questions coming in, but we would like or encourage you all to continue adding them to the list. So if you just go to either scan the QR code on screen now, or if you go to Go to slido.com and enter M Mental Health Forum. How do I get this wrong all the time? So MHF 2023 is the code, and that will get you in. All right, so our next and final speaker for this evening, Dean Yates, was a journalist and bureau chief for Reuters, the international news agency, for 26 years. He bore witness to some of the biggest stories of the past 2 decades, the Bali bombings, the Boxing Day tsunami, and the Iraq War. All that trauma exposure eventually caught up with Dean, and he was diagnosed with PTSD and admitted to a psych ward in Melbourne. He's an author of The Line in the Sand, a highly acclaimed memoir that is being published on June the 27th, so just around the corner. Dean and his family, who live in Evandale, are also being featured on the next Australian Story on Monday night. Big round of applause for Dean Yates, please.
Thank you, Aaron. It's actually June 26th. I got bumped by a week for the Australian Story, but I couldn't argue. You can't argue with the ABC. I just want to acknowledge that I stand here in Lutruwita and land of the Palawa people, acknowledge my First Nations friends and colleagues and the trauma that they have gone through. I also just want to acknowledge the trauma this community has gone through, the tragedy at Hillcrest Primary School. My heart goes out to everyone here and friends, families, loved ones. Devonport's a very special place to me. I'm actually married to a Devonport girl, Mary Binks, whose mother, Mary Binks, was the mayor of Devonport. Not quite sure when that was, some years ago. Annette might remember the exact dates, but yes. So I first was introduced to Devonport in the mid-90s when I first met my wife, Mary, in Hong Kong, and she was working as a journalist up there. And so I've been coming in and out of Devonport for years. And so special place, Devonport. Is Alex still here? He is. Alex, I've been a journalist for 30 years. I've heard so many stories, listened to so many stories. I've covered wars, earthquakes, tsunamis, bomb attacks. I've spoken to ordinary people all over the world, but mate, your story is one of the most inspiring I have ever heard. And I want to thank you for your story. Just incredible. And the way you tell it, I could have sworn you were a journalist there for a minute. So thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. I got a book coming out in less than 2 weeks, and it's taken me 7 years to write that book. And that's partly because it's sort of taken me 7 years to, if you like, I don't use the word recover, I use the word heal. When I talk about trauma, I use the word heal, because I think recovery is something that really applies to that physical. You know, we recover from a physical injury. No one really recovers, I don't think, from mental health issues and trauma. You find a new narrative in your life. You find a new way of living. You find a new normal, and you can actually find a better life. And that's what I've found, and that's what this book's about. And I had a career that some might say put me in the worst place at the worst time, or the right place at the wrong time. I'm not sure, but I just happened to be where a lot of shit was going on as a journalist, and I saw my fair share of trauma and tragedy. As Aaron said, the Bali bombings, the Boxing Day tsunami in Indonesia. I covered earthquakes that people won't even remember. For me, the biggest traumatic event in my life was when I was the bureau chief in Iraq, and 2 of my staff were killed by a US gunship in 2007. And I was the bureau chief for Reuters, the international news agency at the time. Those 2 staff were killed. They were killed on my watch. I was responsible for those men's safety, a photographer and a driver. And that footage was, a few years later, was published by WikiLeaks. And it was called Collateral Murder. Julian Assange published that tape. And that event would later send me on a downward spiral a decade later, combined with all the other traumatic events I'd covered, that would bring me to the brink of suicide in 2016. And it was the intervention of my wife, Mary, who saw how bad I was. And I told her what was going on inside my head. And she said, you need to go to a psych ward and you need to go soon. And I actually said, isn't that a bit drastic? And she said, no, you've hit rock bottom. And 2 weeks later, I was in a psych ward in Melbourne called Ward 17, which is it's a psych ward that it specialises in post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in particular veterans and coppers. They let a journalist in. I'm not sure how that happened. But one of the things about this psych ward was that I walked into this place and I remember seeing I saw these veterans, these big guys, their tattoos on their shoulders, the military tattoos. And I thought, I'm not worthy. Look at what these men have done. Look at what these guys have done. They fought on a front line. They saw combat. All I did was report. I didn't actually do what they did. And it was something I struggled with for a couple of days until they opened their arms to me and said, welcome. You are here as one of us. You're a brother because you've got PTSD. We don't care that you're a journalist. You have got PTSD. You are one of us. And I had 3 admissions to this psychiatric ward, Ward 17. And the whole time I have been there, the first responders, the veterans, it didn't matter what we did on the outside, our professions. We're all on this same boat together. And that was trauma, PTSD. And I remember the first group session I went to, and I was sitting there actually saying nothing, just observing, listening. And I remember thinking, these guys are just like me. They're talking about their nightmares. They're talking about their anxiety. They're talking about how they've nearly ruined their marriages. So I'm thinking, this is just like me. And there was I just felt this connection with these guys. And for the first time, I felt I'm not alone. I thought that no one would know what it was like to be inside my head. But these guys, these men and these women were just like me. And it was such a powerful moment because I realized then that I didn't have to do this journey of healing on my own. And that whole time I was in that psych ward, we'd have group sessions, we'd be sitting around. There were some old couches that we'd sit on and we'd laugh and we'd joke and we'd tell stories. And it was through the bonds that I was able to forge with these folks that it really helped me get that notion into my head that I'm not alone and that there are ways and methods and strategies that I can learn to manage the trauma that I'd gone through. It's taken a long time. And funnily enough, when I went to the psych ward the first time, I thought I'd come out cured. I literally did. And after 2 weeks there, my psychiatrist, who was this amazing woman, born in the Middle East, born in Iran, actually. And one day she said, this is just an introduction to treatment, right? And I just like, what? I thought I'd walk out of there a new man. She said, no, this is an introduction to treatment. And that was what was hard about that was that it was the understanding and accepting that it was going to take time, that it wasn't like getting over the flu, that this journey of healing was going to take years. And it did take years, but I learned so much along the way. I learned so much about myself and I learned so much about life and what was important to me. But that initial getting told that was difficult. With this book, if I was to sum up the most important message in this book, the biggest lesson that I've learned out of writing this book And I looked all over the world for the best treatments, right? I emailed the world's best experts on PTSD. I called these people up. I guess you can do that if you're a journalist. That's fine, right? No one's going to stop you. The most important message out of that book, human connection. It was the human connection that has got me where I am today and still standing here. The human connection of my family, right? My wife, Mary, who stood by me when I was impossible to live with, when she basically wanted me to go and live in the paddock because I was so awful to have around. The human connection of my kids, who were young teenagers at the time, absolutely confused. What the hell's happened to Dad? This is not the Dad we remember. They loved me unconditionally. The human connection of my friends. When one of the things about PTSD is that you isolate yourself. You don't want to talk to anyone. You just want to go and live in a cave. And I did that for a long time. And then I finally, after my first admission to Ward 17, I wrote a story about my time in Ward 17 and the journey I'd been on. All of my old mates from university had no idea that I was even sick. And that story was published, and I got a phone call from my best mate from university who said, and he didn't say, mate, why didn't you tell me you weren't well? He just said, what are you doing next week? He said, I'm coming down. Right? And we went off to the Tarkine for a few days, and I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. And then, as a result of that trip, he arranged for a bunch of our mates, some of them I hadn't seen in years, to come down a few months later, and we all went down to the Tarkine. And we've done it every year since then. That human connection. And it was also, it was family and friends, and then there was the human connection within the mental health system, which I know there are a lot of problems, right, with the mental health system in this country. Miranda is not one of them. But what I came across with my clinicians in the psych ward were clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, social worker, people who wanted to take the journey with me. And they wanted to hear my story. It wasn't like, okay, well, let's put you on this medication, let's put you on that medication. It was like, Dean, I want to hear your story. Tell me your story. And then let's go from there. Let's work out how you can heal. And that, to me, was like they opened their hearts and took this journey with me. And so that human connection has just been, that book's called Line in the Sand. It could be called Human Connection, but it's not a very sexy title. But that's the main message. And other things I learned, and I really sort of stress in this book, are education and awareness. And Miranda talked about this beautifully in her presentation, right? She talked about the resilience zone. When I was in the psych ward, they called it the window of tolerance. Same thing, right? Yeah, window of tolerance, right? So I remember my treating team, and it was a whole team, they would say to me, they would say to all of us, right? You'd have these big buffy blokes sitting around a table, or everyone in tattoos, and they'd say, guys, every morning you wake up, check, where are you in your window of tolerance? Where are you sitting? Are you in the high zone? Are you in the low zone? Or are you in the okay zone? And what that meant was that if you were able to be aware enough and work out where you're sitting, you could take action if you needed to. Okay, so if you're in that high zone like Miranda was talking about, right, and you're anxious or you're angry or you can feel that stress coming on, you can use strategies, which they also taught, to deal with that. And so I would wake up in the morning and I'd be going, oh, where's my window of tolerance? Where am I in my window of tolerance? And they kept throwing it at us. But it was great because what it meant was that I still do it. And I still think to myself, where am I in my window of tolerance today? And what it means now is that if I feel a bit of stress coming on for whatever reason, I can actually stop. And this is again like what Miranda was talking about. I can stop, notice it, and I can think, okay, where is it in my body? For me, it's usually my chest, and I can do something about it. And that's the importance of having the awareness and the understanding and the education. Doesn't mean you've got to go out and read a bunch of academic textbooks about psychiatry or put you to sleep, but you can learn enough from slides like Miranda's, right, that teach you about the vagus nerve and it's just some of these key elements so that you have an understanding of what's going on inside and the conversation between your mind and your body. It's really worth it. The other thing that came up a lot in the psych ward was the workplace. And you guys might find this really strange, but despite everything I did for my organisation, Reuters, at the time it was 23 years, whenever there was something going on, I'd put my hand up and say, I'll go. I had a bag packed. When I was living in Aid, I had a bag packed ready to go, jump on a plane, go wherever. And despite everything that I had given to the organisation, they treated me like damaged goods when I got PTSD. And after my first psych ward admission, they actually tried to throw me out. They tried to force me out of the organisation. I know this is a common story, right? When someone gets a mental illness, PTSD, coppers, ambos, paramedics, firefighters, happens all the time. Veterans, happens all the time. And in the psych ward, there were mainly veterans and first responders. Every single one of us, we reckoned that we could have dealt with the trauma that we encountered on the job, whether that was covering a war or going to a burning building or having to go to a road accident. What we couldn't deal with was the betrayal that we encountered from our organizations, because how do you heal from that? Can't take any medication for that. And so the other big message I've got in my book is for organizations to really be aware of your staff, your employees, and their mental health. And there's so much research out there now. It's not funny how much research there's out there about good mental health in the workplace. It's good for the organization. It's good for the bottom line. It's really, it's so bleedingly obvious. But what organizations need to understand that behind that research are human beings. There are people and there are families. And when organizations don't look after their staff, there are consequences. And so I plead with organizations, I plead with bosses, look after your people. Ask them, how can I help? Is there something that how can I support you? And it's the same model that Alex was referring to, right? Supporting people. Organizations need to understand that support from an organization when someone is sick, when someone's got a mental health illness, crisis, trauma, the support from the organization is just as important to them as getting support from their family and friends. Because a lot of us identify with our work, right? That's where some of us get our identity from. It's how we pay the mortgage. If you don't get that support from the organization, it's like just getting your legs taken right out from underneath you. And for me personally, dealing with the betrayal of my organization when they tried to kick me out, treating me like damaged goods, was harder to heal from than all of the stuff I witnessed overseas, including the deaths of my staff. It was harder to heal from. So I think that's just some of my key messages there. We live in a time with a mental health system that is absolutely jammed to the gills. We know that. We know it's hard to find support. We know there are long waiting lists. We know that it's actually the same all over the world. It's not just Australia that's having these problems. I got friends in the United States, in Europe, in the UK. It seems to be the same everywhere. COVID's has obviously worsened this. But my message is, if you are looking to go into some sort of counselling therapy, Keep looking, find someone who's going to work for you, and keep looking until you do. Go on those waiting lists and wait as long as you have to, because the person, if you find that right person, then that could be a lifelong journey you're on with someone. It is worth the wait. But there's a lot you can do yourself. And I think that's been the message from Alex and Miranda as well. There's a lot you can do yourself. We can't do it, but we can't do it on our own. So it comes back to that human connection, talking with friends, talking with family, talking with colleagues. And I think the power of being able to come together as a community like this, especially after tragedy, really shows the benefits of being open and talking and supporting each other. Thank you very much for having me tonight. It's been a real honour. Thank you to Man Up Tas. Thank you to the Devonport City Council and other organisers. Great set of expos out there as well. Hope to have a chat with some of you a bit later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dean. Great story, and I look forward to getting myself a copy of your book so I can have a bit more of a deep dive into it at home. So I'd like to thank all of our guest speakers. Their stories, their message has been absolutely incredible, and the lessons that we can take away from it have been, unreal. So we're now going to take a quick 20-minute break again to go back out, mingle, catch up with the guest speakers, and head out and meet some of the expo holders as well. Have a chat to those guys. So, all right, are we all just about ready for the panel session to begin? The table's definitely not level. Anyway, I hope you all had a great opportunity to catch up with some of the expo holders out in the foyer, and an opportunity to talk to some of our guest speakers. So additional to our guest speakers this evening, I'd like to introduce our additional panel members for tonight. So quite obviously, with the Lifeline logo on his vest, we have Mr. Ben Fisher. He is one of the managers at a Tasmanian Lifeline, which was a new service introduced into the state during the COVID pandemic, and by all accounts is growing every time him and I have a chat. Next to him in the patterned shirt, we have Jonathan Bedlow, or as I know him, JB. So JB is one of the founding members of Men's Resources Tasmania, who are our auspicing organisation. So they have been a huge contributing factor to the ongoing success of Man Up Tasmania. And JB as a person has been a huge help to me going forward in this journey working in the mental health space. And at the very end, we have Sarah Walker, who is here on behalf of Australian Children's Foundation. Sorry, Sarah, you and I don't have a lot to sort of talk about as far as backstory, but I'm sure she will have heaps to engage with you all as far as the questions that are coming through this evening. So throughout this session, if you would like to ask more questions, I will try my very best to have a look at what's come through. And this is in no particular order of when they came through. It's just which ones that we have sort of decided will be the most important and relevant for our panellists. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we will try our very hardest to answer all the questions that come through, and to find the answers to those. If you would like to follow us on Facebook, we'll be publishing those answers over the coming weeks. So my first question, or your first question I should say, to the panel. How can we best validate someone when they ask for help without just saying, stay calm, you'll be okay, things will improve? Adults and children. Over to you guys.
It's probably better at it. Yeah, actually, maybe someone who's actually, talk tonight about a, recent experience of, that having happened would be more validating
Well,
than
I
a
can-
professional view. So yeah, go.
I can take over. Well, what was your name again, sorry? Ben, I was speaking to Ben just before and just a chat in the back room. And he was telling me how people would come to him and ask him for help when they're struggling. And I was wondering, I asked him, how do you respond to that? Isn't that quite difficult or quite a responsibility? Is that hard for you? And he goes, the way you respond is you're just there to listen. And so you don't even need to say anything really, you just need to be there, available to listen and hear whatever they have to say. So you don't need to offer anything, you don't even need to offer advice. You just need to be there to support and have someone they can lean on, because sometimes that person, when they're struggling, when they're suffering, all they need is to lean on someone else. And so I think one of the most powerful things is to be able to listen.
Ditto.
Something to that. One of the hardest things, I think, when you've got an issue that you're dealing with is people saying to you, don't blame yourself, it wasn't your fault. And when my staff were killed in Baghdad in Iraq, everyone would say to me, it wasn't your fault, it was war, right? But no one would actually listen to me and hear what I had to say about why I felt responsible for their safety. And so I think to really validate people, you actually have to be prepared to get in the trench with them, get in the hole that they're in and listen. It's tough, but I think it's important to try and do so.
We add a bit to that as well. I think there's not been too many situations where I've said stay calm and they've actually stayed calm. So I think what we really need to do is exactly what you're talking about, and that's think about what it's like to be that person. What is it they're going through, and empathise with them, and listen. And we don't always know the answers. We don't need to know the answers. And probably the way you would come back and say is everything okay? I'm here and you're ready to talk. Because sometimes silence is your best friend. So I think what we find sometimes is, like Alex and I were talking about, is it's hard to build connections because sometimes people that want to connect don't know what to say. And it's okay to know what not to say, and it's okay to say, look, I don't really know what to say that, or I don't fully understand that, but can you help me understand that? And then just say, look, I don't know the answer, but between the two of us, I'm by your side and we'll both find the answer and we'll get through this together. And I think that's really important.
And I'll just say one more thing quickly. Even if all we can say is, I can't imagine what that's like, it sounds really tough. So there's a little phrase that we can say that shows our effort to try and step into where they're at.
And I was just going to say, I think it's really important to reflect on the other person in that situation as well, that it's really tough to sit in silence and in space, and we often want to fix the problem or find a solution straight away, that it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to validate that you don't know what needs to be done, that you can just empathise and be present with that person.
And the stay calm thing is for us, right? Stay calm, it's okay.
Next question. How can I best support a partner and children when I get home and my own world is overwhelming?
I'd really like to know the answer to this one, because I think this is me on the daily. I think there's an element where when you have a safe relationship within your family or within the relationship that you're in with your partner, that there needs to be some common understanding and some common ground around being able to acknowledge the space that you're in when you walk in that door, being able to share the load with that other person and say, you know what, I'm absolutely at capacity. And we need to get better at being okay with that. We are useless sometimes at that. We need to be able to walk in the door and say, I've had a really tough day, or I just am not coping at the moment. And we need to be able to support the other person to then pick up the load for the remainder of that afternoon, evening, as well as being okay with finding things that we need to implement in our own days to regulate ourselves and to make sure that we're not actually at capacity all day, every day.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on whether you're a man or a woman, and there might be a different take on that. So I'll speak to the experience of being a man. I think that sometimes it's about separating from the day. So you may have had a hell day for some reason. Can you just find 5 minutes before you get out of the car at home to just do what Miranda was suggesting? Sense where you're at, what's actually going on, where are those thoughts, feelings, concerns in your body. Breathe, a few deep breaths, and then go in. And I think, again, as a guy, sometimes it's about actually they just need some help. And so getting in and doing something practical, the dishes or helping with the kids, taking over the kids if that's appropriate. That's just a few thoughts.
Yeah, maybe as well, I think when we self-reflect and we see what window it is we're sitting in, I think we actually get asked that every day because it's an icebreaker when we go into a conversation, because every conversation we go into is, hey mate, how you going? And what's our go-to answer? It's always good. So maybe we need to take a bit more time to self-reflect when someone actually answers and says, hey, how are you going? Actually sit there and think, and where am I and where am I at? And where am I when I'm leaving work, like you're saying? I think the important part about being a carer is knowing how to care for yourself, because if you can't care for yourself, it's really hard to care for someone else, because then their trauma becomes your trauma. And just knowing your body really well. And that's coming from a male who's not very spiritual, but I have to do it myself, to regulate every day, after debriefing and taking some of the toughest calls from people that have been in their toughest moments of their life. So, it's difficult, but learn to know yourself and not lie to yourself and just think that you can grit your teeth and get through it. Actually recognise that when you are struggling and say, I'm struggling, and what are my go-to things to help me get me out of that place.
Much respect, Ben, for the work that you do, by the way. I think interestingly, in my relationship, I'm a journalist, my wife was a journalist. Sometimes our biggest problem is communication. Both professional communicators, and we just couldn't talk to each other. We just didn't know we weren't able to communicate. I think if you've got that front and centre when times are difficult, but the other thing is honesty. You've just got to be honest about how you're feeling and how life situations are affecting you. Otherwise, those problems are just going to snowball and get bigger.
To all presenters, I'll move on to the next question. Does talking about your experiences ever re-traumatise or trigger you? If it does, do you have strategies in place to help you manage this?
Yes, very good question, isn't it? Because from a psychologist's perspective, we don't always need to go over stuff. There are many ways to heal, and part of the difficulty is working out the way that works for us, really. Because, it can be, and we can, re-traumatise ourselves unintentionally at times. So, I guess we don't need, from my perspective, we don't need to always go over stuff, but again, it's this starting with the self, and working out what is right for you and at what time, because we might have different needs at different times, and we might have different ways of sort of connecting to how we might work through something.
Yeah. Well, I kind of approach my life when I face these traumatic events, especially the uncontrollable life events. I try and, if it is the uncontrollable, I try and accept it as soon as I possibly can, because if I have no control over it whatsoever, like there's nothing I can really do or say or think that can change the fact that whatever that thing happened, I can't do anything about it. So what I usually try and do, the way I approach life, is I just accept it and find a way to move on. And so by approaching it that way, in theory, I wouldn't be looking back, reflecting on those traumatic events like the question's asking. But I think it's also good to, in my life, when I go back over those difficult life events that I've been through, I think it also is very beneficial for me because it kind of shows me how far I've come, that I can overcome those difficult situations. And when I've reflected and I've seen that I've done it before, I'm like, well, I've done it before, I've overcome that obstacle before. Like, if another obstacle arises, I can do it again. I know I can. I know I have the strength to. So when those uncontrollable life events occur, yes, we need to try and accept it as soon as we can and try and find a way to carry forward or an alternative way or adapt to continue to strive forward in life. But it's also good to reflect on our past and show how far we've come and realise that we have grown and become a better person.
Yeah. Sometimes my family gets sick of me talking about PTSD in the house. They say, would you stop talking about that? Because I'm always talking about mental health. I get meaning from it. And so coming here and talking to you folks about what's happened in my life, the trauma that I've been through, I get meaning from that because I'm trying to spread a message and raise awareness. So I go away from this needing a lie down and probably a couple of drinks, but I get great meaning from it. That's what gets me up each day.
Just quickly, I'll just add that I was talking to a couple of the Man Up guys, and I think the common theme that is so obvious tonight that we can take from these stories and these speeches is the power of connection and how it's just so underestimated and just how important it is to, as soon as something doesn't feel right, find those right connections, find those people that can help you and work on it early rather than waiting till you're in crisis. The early intervention and the earlier we can get and the more connections you can build and the tools that you can give people to help them deal with what they're going through, I think these guys have done it really well tonight.
And I want to be slightly controversial and say sometimes it's totally fine to not want to talk about it. And actually it's a really important part of dealing with trauma. I teach mental health first aid, and within that course we talk about the fact that we no longer sort of have that mandatory counselling after a traumatic event. It's much more about choice. So sometimes the social connection, yes, but maybe it's actually going fishing or, you know, just being with each other and not getting into the big stuff.
Thank you. Next question, probably relevant for Sarah anyway. How do I help my child who has been witness to a significant mental health issue and is now showing challenging behaviours?
Such a good question, such a big question, obviously. I think the most important thing that we can do to support our kiddos at school, at home, in any of our environments is understanding that our children don't behave the way that they do for no reason. There is always a need and always a wanting to communicate as something through that behaviour. Sometimes that's really difficult to comprehend or to understand when things are so dysregulated at home or things are really tough at school or at home. And again, we spoke about it before around making sure that we're regulated before we're able to co-regulate our kiddos. But I think if anything, that's the most important thing. We have to regulate ourselves. We have to be able to take a step back and make sure that we're able to acknowledge that there is something going on at home, something going on with kid, and that child is trying to communicate some type of need. And there's a huge list of, obviously, of what that need might be, but I think when we're talking about maybe home being really challenging or school being really challenging, we're talking about kids wanting to connect, and children don't know how to connect through their words often, so they show us that through their behaviour. That's really tough for us as adults who want to make sure that children are able to communicate their needs and tell us how they feel and use zones of regulation and all of those things that we hope we can support our kids to do. But when they don't know how to do that, they have to communicate somehow. When we obviously don't meet that need, the behaviour escalates and gets bigger and bigger. And that's when we get ourselves into really tough situations, I guess. So if anything, I think it's about working out how we can connect again, as we keep saying, connect with our kids and connect with our children and find moments in our day to be attuned to our children and their needs. And that doesn't have to be a big task. That can be a 5 minutes at the end of the day, or a brushing your child's hair before they go to daycare every morning. It doesn't have to be a task that feels so big. So if anything, we need to be attuned to our kids and understand that there's a need behind that behaviour.
One of the things that I've valued about learning in psychology is being able to see underneath the sort of noise of the behaviour, how it looks on the surface, or the words that come out of someone's mouth sometimes, and to just see that there's distress underneath there. There's the needs, Sarah said. There's and actually responding to that rather than the, what's thrown at you when people are angry or anxious, and really sort of trying to connect with that, which again comes back to that being self-regulated enough to not be reactive to that and to really see that other person, because at the end of the day, I think we all just want to be seen, really. And we develop our sense of self by being seen by the people that are important to us in our life as we grow up. And I think that's one of the most challenging things as a parent, but most important.
Sorry, I get excited. I think the other thing that's really important is that it's all well and good that we say that we support everybody to understand that really good information, but we don't always get it right, and that's also okay. Just because I sit here and say it doesn't mean I go home and can be regulated and co-regulate my children. That's not the way it works. But it's really beautiful to understand, and if you're interested, to look into the process of rupture and repair, and understand that as ruptures occur, we repair that relationship, and the repair of that relationship is more important and exciting, I guess, for our relationships and the learning through that process. So it kind of gives us mums and dads and grandmas and grandpas the opportunity to not be so hard on ourselves about the really horrible times, but to acknowledge that they will be there, that's never going to go away. But the learning and the growth and the attunement that happens through that repair is really important and really beautiful.
Okay, the next question, it's addressed to all speakers. What was the most recent challenge that threw your emotions off the scale? And what steps did you take? Who helped you get back on track? Now, if we could just focus on perhaps the last two, and perhaps not go over the individual challenges for you guys, and perhaps just give the audience some answers to what steps did you take when something was challenging, and who or what helped you get back on track?
All of my three kids have had either a mental health crisis or a major physical health crisis in the last 3 or 4 years, and that have all required trips to emergency. And I've actually, in those cases, those instances, used the stuff that I was taught in the psych ward to keep myself try to keep myself in my window of tolerance, my resilience zone that Miranda was talking about, to keep myself focused on what I need to do to help them in those moments of crisis. And so the tools that I actually learnt myself in my own mental health journey have come in enormously helpful when having to help loved ones.
Yeah, for me, this is not about a specific event, but the preventative approach I take to this is that great mates, which is a pretty key theme from what we've said tonight, is fundamental. And that to create great mates, because I think it's really important to acknowledge we don't necessarily all have great mates. There are actually a lot of people that feel really isolated and don't have social connections, and that actually the job for all of us is to reach out to reach into those people, not get them to reach out because it's too hard. But for me, great mates, to get to great mates, you need quantity time, which is not necessarily hours and hours and hours, but regular, with intention. So some intention to connect and find out how each other's world is, and that creates great mates and quality time.
Yeah, I can have a crack. A strategy that I implement when I face some sort of hardship or I find myself down in life is when I'm facing some sort of difficult event, I kind of picture myself being worse off, than I am in that already so-called difficult situation. And what that does is it puts me in that situation that I'm imagining where I am worse off. And when I'm in that situation I'm imagining, it makes me realise that that actual situation I'm in, that so-called difficult situation I'm in, it makes me realise that it actually could be a lot worse, and makes me realise that it's actually not that bad, and I'm just grateful that it's not as bad as it could be. And that just enables me to appreciate what I have more and realise that it could be a lot worse, and it kind of stabilises my emotions a bit and keeps me in a state of peace and enables me to be more constantly happy and manage my emotions and manage that hardship and that difficult event that I'm in.
For me, recently when I had a family member with a medical emergency, and as much as I practice internal resourcing all the time, sometimes things are so big that you have to do the external resourcing and moving the body. And I remember I just told all these people about what had happened who would listen, and I got on my bike and went for a big ride and stretched and just did all this sort of other stuff before I could actually really tolerate what was going on, inside my own body. It's complex, this stuff, being human, isn't it? We just got to really sort of learn at what works for us.
I think for me it was grief of a family member, and as someone I think that talks to a lot of people every day that would bring up about grief, it just really showed me that grief is handled in so many different ways, and why there are the 5 steps of grief. There's no linear approach, and there's no you'll go through this stage and then this stage, you jump out of one and you're going to another. And I just felt it so hard, and it's always a way, and when we saw it, it really sort of stood out to me that a lot of the family members, a lot of the people that wanted to connect with me, they didn't know what to say, so they went to what they knew best, and that was cook for me. and a lot of what they cooked I didn't like. But I just recently read a quote, and I can't think of who it was, but it'll stick with me, and hopefully you guys can take it away as well, is sometimes when you say yes to someone else, you're actually saying no to yourself. So think about when you say yes to something else and how that might affect you.
All right, to all speakers, if you could give your 15-year-old self some advice, what would it be? Keep it PG.
I'll go first. We spoke to Alex about this, and I said to him, when I was that age, I wouldn't need any advice because I knew everything. And I think that's what turned around, was the fact that when things started going wrong for me and I couldn't show what was going wrong because I didn't want to be vulnerable, because I was trying to be the person that everyone saw me from the outside, I knew all the answers. But I think if I look back now, would be look out for other people and help other people as much as you can, because you never know when it's going to be around the corner that you'll need it.
Don't have much to say here because I'm pretty close to 15 already. Like, but no, when I was 15, like I was a very kind of superficial kid and I didn't really have much meaning in my life. Like it was literally, as I said, just footy and chicks and mates type of thing. So what I would say to my 15-year-old self is to serve others more, because when you're serving others and making a difference to someone else's life, you're actually making a more meaningful impact in life, and that gives you a sense of meaning in life and a sense of stabilization and a sense of purpose. And when you serve others your life, and once you get to the end of your life, at least you can look back and say that you've made a difference to this world. Because if I kept up the guy that I was when I was 15, just being superficial, like I said, if I got to the end of my life, I know that I would look back and I'd probably be unfulfilled. So I think that serving others and aiming to make a difference and leave something behind on this earth gives you a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, which kind of helps you in the long run. So, yeah, that's what I'd probably say to my 15-year-old self.
And I'd tell myself, tell yourself every day, I am okay as I am.
Yeah, I like that. And when are you going to cook for your mum and dad?
Last question. When talking to someone that is struggling with mental health but doesn't want to be helped, how do you approach that conversation?
I'm happy to go first there. I've had a few conversations. I was actually, my last job at Reuters was head of mental health, and for 2,500 journalists around the organisation, around the world. And I sometimes had conversations like this, and I actually trained other managers on how to have these sorts of conversations. And I think if someone doesn't want to talk but is in distress, it gets to a point where you have to have a conversation. If someone is in such a level of distress, you have to have a conversation. You can't just let it go. Up to a point, you can respect someone's wish to not talk, and you can say, I'm here if you want to talk. I'm always available. Call me. But when someone, if you think that someone is really unwell, you've got to take action. That's my view.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and probably one we face every day. I think it's just about letting that person know that you're there when they're ready. And it's not always that you need to bring it up really direct. Look, we need to talk about your mental health, because when you go too direct, you're just going to push them away. It's helpful if you find a common interest that you've got, talk about that interest and really sort of take them away from that topic. And when you start building that connection, sometimes it'll be that they'll start saying, yeah, when I was fishing the other day, it actually started crossing my mind that I were starting to notice things were a bit different. So it mightn't be that you take it on head on. It might be that you build that common interest. And something when I was doing a bit of work with Aaron, someone said to us that they noticed that their neighbour was struggling and they knew that they couldn't go and approach them about their mental health. This person also had all the tools under the roof, but he went next door to ask if he could borrow a jigsaw, I think it was, just to start the conversation. And this guy just said, yeah, look, be careful, the blade's blunt. And that was the way he started building that conversation. So, yeah, don't think you've got to take it head on. Find a common interest, build that connection, and it'll eventually come when they're ready. Because we know when we ask someone to do something, if we're stubborn enough, that's usually what they'll do the exact opposite. So sow a little seed, let them come back to you and say, actually, you might be right, it might be worth going and have a conversation with my GP. Would you mind coming along with me? And that's just through building that connection and that friendship. And just be mindful probably not to ask too many times, are you okay? Because that might push people away as well.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And to say, if somebody's really in that place of crisis, it may be that the conversation with them is actually not what they need. They actually need professional help, so it's an emergency call of some sort. But yeah, I did some training years ago in facilitation, and one of the underlying sort of principles in that was people just want to be heard and they just want to be held. And that might be being held physically, but it's being held emotionally. And if we're just there and engaged, they're already safer in terms of their physical safety if there's suicidal thoughts and things going on. That's a massive step right there.
And I guess pre-crisis, we're talking about role modelling appropriate behaviour and behaviours that are healthy and are created through connection and engagement. So implementing things in the home or in the school or in the workplace that promote that really healthy lifestyle, I guess support the ability for other people to then be able to engage in those behaviours as well.
Thank you, everyone. That is a wrap for our panel session for this evening, and although we couldn't get through all of the questions as mentioned, we will try to answer those which we haven't online over the coming weeks. So before everyone heads off into our last little opportunity to engage with Expo stall holders and also our presenters, could we give a round of applause for our people on stage, please? I'd also like to make special mention to our sponsors for tonight's event, which is Primary Health Tasmania. So a round of applause for those guys as well, please. And also like to thank the wonderful Danielle at the back of the room and Karen from Devonport City Council for everything that they have done throughout this event. To the Man Up Tas guys that have been absolutely stellar in organising this in my sort of absence with a 1-month-old baby. So they have been unreal. So just a round of applause for those guys as well. Thank you. Now, before these guys step off stage, I'll have Michael present them with a few small gifts as tokens of our appreciation for being here and sharing your wisdom with the guys here in the audience. And I hope that you can stick around and guys in the audience can stick around to chat to everyone that's still here. So lastly, I'd like to thank you all, everyone that turned up today, everyone that watched on the live stream. This event is for you. This is the first of, I hope, many. We really want to continue engaging with community and allowing community to ask questions of professionals that we can try and spruce up from around the place. So I thank you all for being here. I hope you got something out of it. We would love your support, so if you would like to support Man Up Tasmania, check us out. All our details are on our flyer, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.